somehow I never managed to make a beautiful tulip on camera. But fortunately I can always blame it on the lack of space. Anyways, today's video is not about latte art, but it's about this camera, the EOS R, if you should consider buying it in 2022. Well, let's first discuss its limitations, because then it's easy to know if there's a deal breaker and this camera isn't for you. Let's begin with frame rates. This camera can shoot at 120 frames per second, but only in 720p. And that's actually the reason why this is the second time only that I'm using 120 frames per second on this camera. Another thing to mention about filming in 120 frames per second is that you have no autofocus. If you want to introduce any movement or something, you're gonna have to maybe just do some rotating shots around that object and not go further or closer, because then you'll basically get the object out of focus. Another limitation is that there is no 4K 60 frames per second. So if you want to do any sort of slow motion, even at 60 frames per second, you have to only do it in 1080. The third is that even when it shoots 4K in 24 or 30 frames per second, it has a massive crop of 1.7 something. When you're not stabilized, because when you use electronic image stabilization, then it crops in even more. So it's pretty unusable as a vlogging camera at 4K unless you're using a super wide angle lens, and I'm talking like 14 millimeters and below. People could actually argue that it's good that it has this crop, and in some scenarios, for example, if you're shooting wildlife and you want to take a video of some bird or something, and you get that much closer to your subject, and that is actually good. But the problem in this case is that this camera only has face and eye detection autofocus for humans, and it doesn't have like the R6 or R5 any object detection or animal detection autofocus. So it's, even though you can get closer to it, it will be hard to get it in focus. Plus you're shooting 24 or 30 frames per second, so you won't be able to capture any astonishing slow motion of the animal. The only scenarios when you might use it is when you're taking videos of the moon, because that doesn't require any movement or anything. I have the 24 to 105 millimeter kit lens on this camera, and this is actually the very first time that I'm filming a video in 4K. And I really love the quality when it's standing still, like it's really beautiful. It's super clear. I really like the colors. It's like really amazing. But the one thing that I don't like is that it just gets so close. And for right now, for example, there's a distance of about 3 meters from the camera to the wall, and I'm somewhere in between. So you need to use the entire room if you want to film on this camera in 4K. And also, like this, it kind of feels a bit formal and not like you are very close to me. It helps connect the people behind the screen with the person in front of the camera more when they are kind of close, so to say. Another big major flaw with the 4K is that you can't really move it side to side, because the rolling shutter is really terrible. Take a look at this clip when it's panning left or right. In the middle of the clip, if you stop it, you will see that the lines of the objects aren't straight, and then when you see it as a moving clip, then it's not uniform, and that's really unpleasant to see. Now I have prepared 3 clips for you, one in 120 frames per second in 720p. The second one is in 60 frames per second in 1080, and the third one is in 24 frames per second 4K. For some of you it might be acceptable. Maybe you don't need like super high quality video coming out of it. Maybe you just need people to be able to look at it and not doubt that it's taken on a super cheap phone. Another really bad limitation with this camera, it doesn't have in-body image stabilization. So it's really terrible if you want to be a bit adventurous with your clips, if you want to introduce some rotation or go close and be a bit, I don't know, crazy with the camera, let's say, because the footage will be super shaky. And that really comes in handy when you want to shoot videos of other people, or if you're doing some commercial videos for restaurants and stuff like that. When it comes to photos, thanks to its 30 megapixel sensor, I really love the results actually. I've pretty much always been satisfied with it. And I find the image is quite clean, and I can crop quite a long way into the image and it still feels like the quality is maintained. The only thing that I could point out is that the camera is quite slow with 8 frames per second in one shot autofocus and with 5 frames per second with AI servo mode enabled. To me personally, I don't feel like that's been a big of a problem because I shoot mostly street photography, but I could imagine that it could be a problem for people who are doing sports photography or wildlife photography, where the smallest bit of time can make a world of difference. Now, all of this being said, this brings me to 7 things that I love about the EOS R. The video quality in 1080 is superb. With 90 megabits per second, it even gets more data than the Sony a7S III, which is more than twice the price. The ergonomics of the camera are just perfect. I feel like the grip is very good, and in the past few months I haven't been using any wrist or shoulder straps whatsoever, just holding it with my hand, and I feel really confident that it's not gonna fall. The third thing is that I love the flip screen. Not only for doing YouTube, which is a must, like being able to see yourself and see if you are in frame or if you're in focus is just super valuable, but also in any types of angles that you might take the camera, using the screen you always know where it's pointing. Number 4 is that the menus are really good. I find it usually quite easy to find the things that I want, but also what I like most is that you can add 2 personalized menus in the end. And there I put 5 or 6 of the options that I use the most, things like that, that just make your life easier. Number 5, battery life is great. In most cases I can go through the whole day of shooting with just 1 battery, but 2 batteries max. More than that it's never necessary. Number 6, it can shoot 8 bits C-Log, which is not the best to be fair, but actually what's good about it is that with a camera at this price point, you can start practicing and learning how to color grade your footage. And number 7, the last thing, is that it can shoot completely silently without hearing the mechanical shutter hitting. And also you can turn off the beep that it makes when an object gets in focus, so then you don't even notice that it's taking pictures. And I find that really useful in certain situations. Like some days ago when I was shooting outside, we went with another photographer, Philip, inside of a church, and we were shooting there because the architecture was super beautiful and the art inside, of course. And firstly, I didn't want people to notice that I was there, and secondly, I didn't want to disturb them. So I just put it in silent mode, and then they started ignoring me like I wasn't doing anything. So that's a really big plus in those situations. Now let's come to 3 little things that have been annoying me about the EOS R. The first thing I want to mention is that when you have the microphone plugged in, then you can flip the screen 180 degrees. What you have to do is just try to get it a bit back and then flip it and then push it forward again. Number 2, and I don't know if anyone else out there who is using these new Canon cameras has had this experience like me, but the record button stopped working at some point, and it was actually 2 months after I bought the camera. I bought it brand new, by the way, and that was quite surprising. I would just press it and it would stay there. It would stay pressed and it wouldn't come back up. I found a solution by transferring the functions of this record button to the manual function button. So that's a nice feature to have, that you can customize some buttons around the camera. Now I only use the manual function button for record, but it's still, I feel like, unforgivable for those things to happen only 2 months into using the camera. The third thing that annoys me is that these arrows that it has, and instead of a wheel, are actually quite slow. So now, all things considered, would I recommend the EOS R in 2022? Well, I will put it this way, because this is actually a hard question and it depends on what your needs and what your budget is. But for me, if I was to buy this camera myself at this point, I wouldn't. I would just save some more money if I had to buy it right now and go for the R6, because with features like in-body image stabilization and 4K 60 and 1080 120 frames per second, I think I would be happy with that for a much longer period of time than 6 months like I am with the EOS R. If you don't care so much about having the highest quality video and you just want to film in 1080, then maybe you should consider it, because in 1080 is actually a great camera. And also it's worth mentioning that if you have a relatively old computer, in that case it would be better the EOS R than the R6, because your 4K files would be too much for the computer anyway, so you won't be able to edit anything. So that was it for me today. I hope you liked the video. I hope it helped you. If you did, please give a like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any content like this. And also it motivates me to make more videos like this. Peace.